Hi, my name is Helen Garcia, and you're listening to Yellow Chair Collective, the podcast. I'm excited to announce that the founders of Yellow Chair Collective, Sujin Lee and Linda Yoon, have come out with a book called Where I Belong, documenting the specific stories of Asian Americans. If you want to pre-order your copy today, the link will be in the description, and we also have disordered eating groups going on at our practice. And so if you want to jump ahead at some of our groups, please email groups@yellowchaircollective.com. Let's start the episode. You're listening to Yellow Chair Collective, the podcast, an Asian American mental health podcast, not intended to be a replacement for professional or medical advice. Please see your mental health therapist or doctor as needed. Let's get started. So over the last 2 to 3 months, what we've been doing is we've tried to spread awareness about body dysmorphia, disordered eating, and what it's like to live in the guise of a culturally Asian American experience. And what we decided to do today is we decided to create a mashup of all the best parts of each episode so that you can get the best of both worlds, not only a first-class masterclass education on eating disorders, but learning from it with a culturally specific lens. So hope you enjoy the next 30 to 40 minutes of today's episode, and please let us know what your favorite part was. We always love to serve you. And kicking off today's episode is one of my favorite speakers who has been on the podcast 2 times, Eeling Tsai. Eeling is a Brooklyn-based nutritionist and dietitian who works specifically with Asian Americans on disordered eating and helping them unlearn certain habits related to their negative relationship with food. Today's excerpt tackles how people have historically labeled foods as, quote, good or bad, and the challenges of living in an urban environment. And so here's Eeling's take on how to practically unlearn the negative messaging you've gotten with food and how to change your relationship to cooking in general. Let's start part 1.
Having an exposure to a food that you have historically labeled as bad and seeing what actually did happen when I ate that. Is it possible that I can eat that food and enjoy it? Or did my body actually feel good or neutral after I ate that food? We hold a lot of fear about certain foods. And because of that, we might avoid them, or when we eat them, we automatically feel shame and guilt. So I ask my clients to experiment often and be like, go ahead and just eat that food when you're feeling emotionally neutral, when you're in the not an emotionally charged headspace, and let's just collect some data on what actually happens when you eat that food. And more often than not, especially over time, people find, oh, that food really meant nothing to me in that moment. And that is what we're going for with food neutrality.
Taking the time to assess what are some of your automatic thoughts and what are some of the stories that you get when you eat that food. That's really interesting because it's so simple. It's just such a simple thing to do of like, how do you feel? And like, where does that story come from? I want to pivot into a type of service that you offer where you do a lot of cooking consultancy. And can you share more about what the positive impact and even some negative impact you've seen doing some of the work that you're doing with cooking consultancy, and why cooking?
Yeah, I personally love cooking. I don't think people have to love cooking. That is not how I see my role. But I have found it over my own cooking journey to just be really empowering. It's like learning any type of skill. Wow, I used to not know how to do this and now I can. I think that could just be like a really nice experience for people. When it comes to my role as a dietitian, helping people recover from disordered eating behaviors or trying to reach health-related goals, managing their blood sugar, I think confidence is a big part getting there. And cooking is just a really tangible way to build confidence. And I think the couple of things I notice are that, one, it's really hard, right? It's like learning a language, and it's very spatially oriented, especially in New York. We live in really small kitchens. So there are challenges along the way. But I think that if we let it be hard, if we accept that I'm learning something new, this isn't supposed to be easy, this isn't supposed to be simple, but I'm worth the effort to learn a new skill, I think people can come on the other side of cooking and feel really positive about it. Yeah. And really, I think it helps also people connect with food in a way that's not just eating. And so when we're hands-on with food, we maybe connect with the smell of it or the feel of it or learn different ways to use it, a food. So we're not just connected with I ate this thing and now I have a feeling about it. We've seen the journey of the food, the bigger, and it's just maybe a more fun and playful way to think about food than just like the eating part.
You know what I appreciate about you, Eling? It's like you have this very practical way of working with clients just from hearing you talk about things. Because you said something that kind of made me have a light bulb moment. You said, if you let cooking be hard and you acknowledge that it's going to be a tedious, spatially oriented process, it's going to make it easier. And I guess in this fast moving culture, you watch a cooking show and the chef makes it look easy, or people talk about how much they love food, but you acknowledge that it's not easy. And so why is it important to acknowledge that cooking is hard and that it needs to be a process? So you have to, like, when you said connecting with food in a new way, can you unpack that for me? Like, hard, process, tedious, small kitchen. Why do all of those factors come into play when you're doing cooking consultancy?
Yeah, I just think it disrupts this idea that everyone is like such a pro at feeding themselves. Actually, people have lots of challenges feeding themselves, and we have to stop acting like everyone just learned one day when they became a young adult how to.
Yeah, it's like we're all TikTokers.
Yeah. I've had many clients say to me, I can't believe I never learned this. And I'm like, when were we we actually don't have access to this information as young adults, really. Maybe some of us are lucky to have had family members who really were like, we're going to learn how to cook this from A to Z today. But that it hasn't been the norm in my experience working with people. And the place people are typically starting from is this deficit mindset of, I can't believe I got to this age and never really learned how to do it. No, and there's never a wrong time to start learning this. And it's pretty hard for everybody, I think, when we start. And so I really like acknowledging that part first and foremost.
Oh my gosh. I loved what you said. It's like people start off when you're doing this types of service with a deficit mindset of, I'm too old for this. Can you share that with me? Because the first memory that comes up into my head is my mom always says to me, you're already old and you don't know how to make this. It's almost like it comes from, especially immigrant families. It's very straight to the point, like super blunt. What does that mean, deficit mindset? And how do you get someone from a deficit to a growth mindset?
Yeah. Oh gosh. I'm sure we've all heard that before. Sometimes I think, like, especially in these family structures, we are asked to be really adult and also are taken care of in a very unique way that I'm not sure
So true.
Can relate to. I don't know. And maybe that's just me, but yeah, there's a lot of this expectation that I should have learned something a very specific way, or I should already be really good at something. And that just puts us in a place where we're acting like there's no skill already there or something like that. And yeah, I think it's important to just disrupt that first and foremost. Be like, you're making the choice to learn now. There's never a wrong time to learn this kind of stuff. Also, another big one that I think comes up is people who live alone get really frustrated that they can't do it all. Like they can't grocery shop and cook and clean and have their house in perfect order. And I asked them to think about, I'll ask them, are you expecting that you could do all of this? Like most households have, I shouldn't say most, but many people might have a roommate or a partner or a family member or someone who also shares that workload with them. And so what we're supposed to be doing as individuals versus in community. And that has helped a lot of my clients to recognize, I think I'm asking a lot of myself. That's a big one to disrupt, in my opinion, as well. But yeah, once we get to the point of saying, I'm excited to learn a new skill, learning new skills are hard, new skills takes a lot of time and experimentation and failure, then we can start to have a more playful experience with cooking and the tedious tasks that come with it, like cleaning. Like that's, I just can't ignore the fact that there's a lot of this stuff that's like making a mess and having to create systems. It's not just this, let's be totally whimsical and walk into your kitchen and whip up a 3-course meal.
So In the last 10 minutes, we've gone over how to unlearn some of our negative biases towards food and begin to develop a whimsical, fun relationship with how it interacts with our body. Next, we have one of our very own Yellow Chair Collective therapists, Megan Sohn. Megan has a master's in social work and a master's in theological studies, and today she unpacks the layers of growing up Asian American traditionally in the South, and how faith was actually something she weaponized before seeking recovery around disordered eating and perfectionism. Here's her take on how she began to unlearn it and her clear definitions around disordered eating.
So to give some of my own history with it, I growing up never really struggled with food. I loved food. I think I had a really healthy relationship to food and my body. The exception being, so I was totally fine with my body shape and size, never really thought about it. I think the one exception is, again, this ties to the Asianness piece of wanting to distance myself from Asianness and seeing how our beauty norms were so saturated in whiteness, though, of course, as a kid, I had no language for that and just assumed they were objective. And so I think I really tried to distance myself from Asianness. I remember looking up YouTube videos of how to get a double eyelid or how to contour your face so that you have high cheekbones, more narrow nose, things like that. I think that was one piece where I was really concerned with my appearance. But in terms of my body, it was not as big of a thing. But then right before college, my mom with good intentions and innocently said something like, just be careful when you go to college of gaining weight. And so that planted a little seed. And then at the time, I think some of my friends were using the MyFitnessPal app where you track your calories. And so I just decided to get on it and start doing that. But in the beginning, it wasn't really a big deal. It was just almost like seeds were being planted, but I wasn't really struggling that much. But then I got to college, and the way that food worked in my college is it's all buffet style. You can eat as much as you want. And I started to notice it in other people. So I would notice people saying really interesting things about food that I'd never been attuned to before. Things like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I ate that much, or oh, I'm being so bad, or I lack willpower, things like that around what they were eating, and just noticing all the guilt and shame. And so I noticed it on others, but over time, as my freshman year went on, I realized I was right there with them of slowly being in that environment where I think a lot of people were very concerned about food and their bodies. I started to have that same mentality, and then something just ratcheted up and I became very obsessed with thinness. And so that looked like calorie counting, coming up with all these food rules about what to eat, what not to eat. I would try to build motivation by looking up articles on the dangers of sugar and carbs. And I would do exercise I didn't enjoy. It would just be this very consuming thing. And I didn't realize I had a problem at first because of exactly what you were saying, Helen, of when people think of disordered eating, they think of someone with severe anorexia or someone with bulimia who's purging all the time. And I felt like what I was doing was what everyone around me was. So how could it be a problem if it was so quote unquote normal? But then over time, I realized just how miserable I was and how it felt like my life was getting smaller the more I was preoccupied with food and my body. And then over time, came to learn that disordered eating really isn't an either or condition. It's not you have it or you don't. It's really this really big spectrum that can range from the more severe end that we're more familiar with of the anorexia, bulimia, and its extreme forms to lower extremes of disordered eating, which is just chronic dieting or being really unsatisfied with your body, thinking about it all the time. And I think, sadly, that lower extreme is so normalized in our society, so we don't think of it as disordered, but I think it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was only recently that I realized that my relationship with food when I was in college as well started to get worse. But like sociologically, when you think about it, when you're around people that think in a certain way, there's a sense of like groupthink that can happen to somebody. And I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, Megan, but it seems like your relationship to food began to change when you were around other people who had similar thoughts, where it sounds like you weren't coming from a family that struggled with that.
Yeah, I think my family didn't really struggle with it, though I do think sometimes my mom would try diets or talk about her weight. And so I think that maybe shaped me a little bit, but in general, I think it was way worse in college where people were very concerned about their appearance, where they were very concerned with gaining weight and how much they were eating. And so I think just being in environments like that where it's so common, again, we often equate what's normal with what's good, when normal have to mean good.
That's so good. Normal doesn't have to mean good. And I hear that a lot of, everyone struggles through this. It's not that big of a deal. And so you said that it wasn't until later that you realized that you started to feel really miserable in your body and your world started to get smaller. When did this like ding moment and recovery moment start to happen for you?
It started to happen maybe midway through my college experience when I again felt so miserable with this constant cycle of waking up thinking about food, thinking about what do I need to eat today? What can I eat? What can I not eat? At the end of the day, feeling like I had failed in many ways, feeling so much guilt, getting to a point where I really hated my body at times and felt like I needed to punish with even more rules and whatnot. It was just so miserable. Took away from so much of life in the sense of life became about this, and it was hard to really be present and enjoy these other things. And so I think as the misery increased, that was where I started to question things a little bit more. And I think too, another piece of it was my faith experience too. And so I identify as a Christian. And I think initially when I was struggling with this stuff, I actually found a lot of ways to allow my faith to justify disordered eating. There's so many different understandings of Christianity, but I leaned pretty hard into the version of Christianity that is against pleasure and indulgence and material things. And so could really use my faith to justify food being a bad thing and my body being a bad thing. And so I used it at first, but then I got to a point where I thought, if this is what faith is, I don't want this sort of God. Like this God is not the God I want to follow. And it doesn't align with the God I have come to know, one who brings freedom and joy. And so after that, I stumbled across this book called Food and Faith by Norman Wirzba, and it presents a very different understanding of faith, one in which the world is good, food is good, our bodies are good. And that was a really pivotal moment for me because I think our world is filled with so many arbitrarily constructed hierarchies. We have millions of versions of this.
So
But
good.
in the realm of our body, I mean, there's a million hierarchies that come to mind immediately. Things like it's better to be thin than to be bigger. It's better to have white features than Asian black features. It's better to have blue eyes or blonde hair than to be brunette or to have black eyes. All these hierarchies. And so I think my faith was really helpful because it gave me a new sort of perspective of what if all those hierarchies are just things we made up and there's no truth to them?
Wow.
And what if there's this other perspective that I can have by faith that everything is good? These hierarchies we have are destructive and random and false. And so I think that's actually not only how I found healing in part with my disordered eating, but also that was a really important piece in starting to embrace my Asianness too. Because racism is just another arbitrary, destructive hierarchy. And so I think in the realm of race and ethnicity, this was another place where I started to really live into the belief, the hope that all bodies, all races, all ethnicities are good.
So the reason why I'm saying that all of these experts are a masterclass on Asian American body disorders and how it came to be that we start to see ourselves in these deficit-based lights is because we're hearing from real professionals who have struggled with it themselves or have helped other people overcome body disorders. And next, we're going to go a little bit deeper and go towards self-perception. We have author of Decolonizing the Body, Kelsey Blackwell, talking about how to begin to heal from those systems and begin to decolonize the body and ground ourselves. If you've never read her book, Decolonizing the Body, I highly recommend getting your copy today. Completely transformed my life, but enough about me. Let's hear what Kelsey has to say.
So every racialized group has their version of this, but it's that smashing the Oreo is that sense of being racialized a certain way, but then being told for whatever reason, you don't fit in that group.
Yeah.
So you're not Asian enough because you don't speak Mandarin, right? You're not Black enough because your family didn't grow up watching the Jeffersons, right? Whatever. And so in that chapter, I wanted to name that, and this is something, another reason I do this work with women of color, is that the ways that we other each other, the ways that we've been othered, show up in how we other and categorize each other. And oftentimes the pain of feeling othered within the group that we identify is more painful than feeling othered by white-bodied people. Because this is the group that we're hoping we can go to and feel a sense of home and feel a sense of being met and feel a sense of I'm not alone. And when that group is no longer safe for us, that is a form of racial trauma and violence that I don't think it's talked about enough. And it's one that I have experienced in my own life, and I'm not alone there.
Yeah.
When we talk about this in the Black community, it's like a lot of head nods. It's like being Black enough. One of the things that I continue to learn is around recognizing my belonging internally. And that the more I go outside of myself to look for my belonging, the more elusive it is. And as I reclaim my relationship to my body, I'm reclaiming my relationship to my ancestors, all of them, even the ones that I don't know. And I belong because the wisdom of them lives in me, and I am here, and I am of the earth. I may not be of the place that they are, but the memory of that place lives in me. And I can have a relationship to the land that I was born on, right? And to be in an actual practice of reclaiming our belonging outside of the ways that we've been told our hair should look, or our skin should look, or the way we should talk, or how we should dress, is a really powerful practice to engage in, and also one that I find needs to be done over and over again, because these pressures get put onto us. And so in that chapter, this actually came from watching a show that I really did not like, how the women were racialized. And so I was so upset that I just went outside and I started throwing rocks, and they were the best rocks because I would throw them and they would shatter on the ground. And so that chapter is really inviting us to imagine all of these things that have been put onto us, and then to engage in a ritual or process of reclaiming our authority, reclaiming our belonging, and releasing the bullshit that's been hoisted upon us. and it's an act that
So
requires energy. Oftentimes there's anger in it. So that's what breaking the Oreo is. I really love the work of Carla McLaren when it comes to understanding emotions. And many of us have emotions that visit us more frequently. So it could be anger, it could be anxiety, it could be depression, it could be grief, it could be whatever. When it's an emotion that we're not supposed to have, or an emotion that we don't want to have, then and some of this not supposed to or don't want to does come from the ways we've been conditioned. Oh, I'm not allowed to have anger. Anger is about taking up space. I'm not allowed to take up space. So I better stuff this somewhere. Could be, but it could be any number of emotions that we end up stuffing because they're not the nice and pretty emotions to have. And oftentimes that stuffing happens by pushing that emotion somewhere into our body. And then as we start to work with the body, it comes to the fore, right? Yep. And then what do we do with that? Yeah, I think Carla's perspective is, and one that I really align with, is that we, and again, this is part of the ways that we are socialized, but there are good emotions and there are bad emotions. And if it's a bad emotion, then we need to get rid of it. And if we can't get rid of it, then that becomes a problem. But instead to relate to our emotions as wisdom holders, and every emotion, regardless of how we experience it, like if it feels comfortable or if it feels uncomfortable, regardless of that emotion is holding information. And so when that emotion arises, instead of being like, uh-oh, we can say, ooh, this is showing up because there's something it's telling me. And with anger, oftentimes what it's telling us is that our dignity has been challenged. Anger is like, oh, somebody's walking on me. This is an opportunity to reassert a boundary, right? And we may not be in an environment where we can do that, right? Because of whatever expectations there might be, or whatever is available, like maybe our body is not safe there. So to have anger isn't a safe thing. And, or when we recognize that we've had that emotion and based on our environment had to suppress it, to then when we're in a safer place, to honor that emotion, to give it the space that it needs. And there is something about being in that process that starts to break up that conditioning, that then when we come out into our world, with time, we start to see more opportunities for that emotion to surface. So in my own life, one of the ways that this shows up is I'm supposed to be of service. I'm not supposed to be a burden on anyone. I'm supposed to be helpful. And if anyone offers me like a job, then I'm supposed to do it and do it well and respect their authority, right? Like they're in charge. And this has led to me getting underpaid for my work and underpaid for what I offer. And I would feel these resentments around that, but then I would just push them away and keep going. Or I'd go home and I'd talk about that person, but I wouldn't actually do it. But with enough practice of allowing myself to honor that emotion coming up, I need more space. This is showing up because I'm not being valued. I actually had a conversation with someone I was doing work with and said, hey, I need to get paid double what you're paying me. Was it an easy conversation to have? No. But when I had it on the other side of that, I felt relief. And my body was like, thank you for not abandoning. Thank you for trusting what we were telling you.
Question I would have for you: if you could give advice to women like me who are in their late 20s, do you wish you could have learned earlier?
I would say do less. We're really trying to make our way and figure it out and be adult. That's what I was trying to do. Be an adult.
Yeah.
Not honoring like who I was in order to fit the role of who I thought I should be. There was a lot of scheming in my mind of I should do this and I should do that and I should take that certification and right? All of these things happening. And that was coming from a place of insecurity and fear. And what I hope all women feel in the work that I do is that we're enough. We don't have to extend beyond ourselves in order to be enough. We can actually trust what it is that we're naturally drawn toward. We can actually allow ourselves to put things out into the world that even aren't our very best effort. We could put something out and it could be like a C effort. And that is actually enough.
All right, y'all. We're coming into a close, and I'm happy to say that this last part is my favorite episode that has been recorded about disordered eating in this season, partially because Ashley Akel is able to tie in listening to our bodies and food alignment and culture all in one very specific and succinct set of ideas. And Ashley Akel is a licensed marriage and family therapist who specializes in eating disorders and treating people with body dysmorphia, anorexia, and disordered eating in general. She also speaks on world stages and conferences, educating people on the connection between culture and food. And so here is Ashley Akel with the importance of taking care of self and being in community with your body.
Taking breaks is such a big part of my life.
Yeah.
I feel like it's something that I've had to learn to do instead of continuing sort of the mindset of a break is earned. It's like, a break is actually not earned. We deserve rest. We deserve that space of restoration. And that in itself is actually an act of love and revolution and change and advocacy right there. So for me, taking breaks is definitely a big part of how I keep doing this. I also have my own self-care routines. A fair amount of that includes acupuncture and being able to connect with my body in a way that my body is most of the time a pretty pleasant place to be. But there are times when it's, this is not pleasant. And my body's saying it needs something. It needs some TLC. It might need a break. It might need a stretch, some cupping, whatever that sort of is. And I feel like a big part of learning to take breaks has also been learning to listen more and more to what is my body communicating in this moment? How do I hear what my body is communicating, understand what my body's communicating, and ultimately respond to it in a really nurturing, compassionate, kind way, rather than expecting my body to be that transactional machine type orientation, which I think in many respects is actually both built into a lot of my upbringing, but I think a lot of that also came from survival narratives around intergenerational trauma and interpersonal trauma. And when we've had experiences like that have really shattered a sense of safety and predictability, both from others and also within ourselves, taking a more one-dimensional kind of flat piece of paper approach to our bodies and our food is, in my book, very understandable and also not where we have to stay.
Thank you so much for listening to this full mashup episode of all of our disordered eating from Yellow Chair Collective, the podcast. As always, please subscribe if you love this episode. 48% of you who watch this are subscribed, and we're trying to increase the listenership and spread this message to most of the Asian American community. And so if you know someone, please send it to someone so they know that you care and love them. And new episodes are now being released on Fridays. Again, my name is Helen Garcia, a fellow therapist here at Yellow Chair Collective. We're always looking out for you, and we'll see you in the next episode on Friday.